Before we begin tonight's journey, find a comfortable place to rest. Let your shoulders relax, your breathing slow, and allow the noise of the modern world to drift quietly away. We're leaving behind the roaring crowds of the Colosseum, the marching legions, and the ambitious emperors whose names fill history books. Instead, we're going somewhere much quieter. Imagine yourself standing on a gentle hill overlooking ancient Rome as the sun slips below the western horizon. The marble temples glow one last time with warm golden light before fading into soft shades of amber and purple. Long shadows stretch across the streets. Smoke rises from thousands of cooking fires, carrying the comforting scent of fresh bread, roasted vegetables, garlic, herbs, and a hint of wood smoke. This is the hour when Rome slowly changes its personality. The loud business of the day begins to disappear. Merchants count their final coins before pulling heavy wooden shutters across their shops. Blacksmiths let their fires cool. Builders gather their tools. Lawyers finish their arguments, and officials finally stop pretending paperwork is exciting. Now another Rome quietly wakes up. Tiny oil lamps begin appearing behind windows one by one, like gentle stars falling down to earth. Their soft golden glow spills onto narrow stone streets polished smooth by countless sandals. Somewhere nearby, someone laughs loudly enough to make a neighbor roll their eyes. A musician gently plucks the strings of a lyre. The smell of fresh wine drifts from a nearby tavern. The city isn't going to sleep. Not yet. For many Romans, the evening was the best part of the day. After long hours of work beneath the Mediterranean sun, families gathered together for their evening meal. Friends met over cups of watered wine. Lovers searched for quiet corners where conversations felt just a little more personal beneath the gentle light of the lamps. Wealthy hosts prepared elegant dinner parties that might continue late into the night, while ordinary workers simply enjoyed the precious chance to rest their tired feet. And yes, this was also when another profession became especially busy as respectable families closed their doors. Other women, and some men, prepared for work instead. Courtesans adjusted expensive jewelry. Prostitutes waited beneath hanging lanterns. Tavern owners filled fresh jugs with wine. Musicians tuned their instruments. Entertainers rehearsed jokes they had probably told 100 times already. Rome after dark belonged to everyone. The rich, the poor, the lonely, the hopeful, the happily married, the secretly in love, and those simply looking for one more cup of wine before finally heading home. Tonight, we'll gently wander through these streets together, exploring what Roman nights were really like. Not through dramatic movies or exaggerated legends, but through archaeology, ancient writings, faded graffiti, forgotten bedrooms, and the surprisingly ordinary lives of everyday people. Because history often becomes far more interesting when famous people leave the room. As the last orange light disappears behind Rome's rooftops, something remarkable happens. The city doesn't become quiet. It simply changes its rhythm. Throughout the day, the forum had echoed with arguments, business deals, political speeches, and endless negotiations. But now those voices slowly fade. Shopkeepers carefully stack pottery, fold colorful fabrics, and cover baskets of olives and figs before locking their doors. Nobody wants tomorrow's customers discovering that neighborhood goats helped themselves overnight. Ancient Rome had plenty of surprises. Goats were only one of them. The busiest marketplaces gradually empty as workers begin making their way home. Some carry fresh bread tucked beneath an arm. Others balance vegetables or small bundles of herbs purchased on the way back. Children race ahead through familiar streets, probably ignoring several parental instructions in the process. Some traditions never really change. In wealthier neighborhoods, large homes become wonderfully alive. Servants hurry between kitchens and dining rooms carrying warm dishes seasoned with pepper, coriander, dill, and fragrant olive oil. Bronze lamps are carefully lit before darkness fully settles. Their flames dance softly against painted walls decorated with scenes of gardens, birds, and distant landscapes. The glow isn't especially bright. Roman oil lamps produced more atmosphere than illumination, which perhaps explains why people learned not to leave sandals lying in inconvenient places. Elsewhere, inside modest apartments called insulae, life looked rather different. Entire families often shared surprisingly small rooms. Evening meals were simpler, perhaps bread, cheese, beans, onions, or fish if fortune had been especially kind that week. Conversations filled cramped spaces where privacy was almost impossible. Neighbors heard nearly everything: arguments, laughter, babies crying, someone attempting to sing, sometimes successfully, usually not. Step outside again, and Rome's streets feel completely transformed. Without modern streetlights, darkness arrives quickly. Only scattered lamps hanging outside businesses or glowing from household windows provide pockets of gentle light. Moonlight reflects across pale stone roads, while shadows gather between narrow buildings. Walking after sunset required attention. Uneven paving stones, wandering animals, overflowing drains, and the occasional speeding cart could all make an evening stroll unexpectedly adventurous. Roman writers even complained about nighttime traffic. Imagine finally relaxing after dinner, only for a heavily loaded wagon to rumble past your window, sounding like an earthquake politely asking for directions. Some complaints truly survive every century. Yet, despite these inconveniences, evening walks remained popular. Couples wandered together through quieter streets where daytime crowds had disappeared. Friends stopped outside fountains to continue conversations that somehow never seemed to end. Older neighbors sat outside doorways enjoying cooler air after the day's heat had finally softened. The city itself seemed to breathe differently. Fountains continued their steady splashing. Dogs barked in distant alleys. Owls called from rooftops. Somewhere nearby, laughter escaped from an open tavern door before quickly blending into the warm night air. Above, everything stretched an astonishing sky. Without electric lights, the stars over Rome appeared brilliantly clear. Romans looked upward and saw familiar constellations linked to stories of gods, heroes, monsters, and impossible adventures. Those stars watched over soldiers returning home, merchants counting profits, lovers exchanging quiet promises, and exhausted workers wondering if tomorrow might be just a little easier. For many people, this gentle hour between work and sleep offered something precious. Time. Time to speak with family. Time to share food. Time to dream. Time to fall in love. Or perhaps simply time to enjoy sitting quietly while the city slowly settled around them. Not every Roman evening was peaceful, of course. Somewhere nearby, dice games grew louder than intended. Someone probably drank more wine than wisdom recommended. A neighbor almost certainly insisted on telling the same story for the 15th time. History rarely changes human nature that much. But for countless ordinary Romans, the evening was neither glamorous nor dramatic. It was comfortably familiar. The warm flicker of an oil lamp, the smell of fresh bread, the sound of loved ones nearby, and the comforting knowledge that, for a little while at least, another busy day had finally come to an end. As darkness gently wrapped itself around the eternal city, Rome prepared for a long and fascinating night. And our journey has only just begun. Before Rome truly gave itself to the evening, there was one important ritual that happened across the city. People got ready, not in the modern way, with mirrors surrounded by bright lights and a dozen skincare products promising miracles by Tuesday. Roman evenings began much more slowly, with warm water, fragrant oils, careful hands, and a surprising amount of patience. If you wanted to look your best for dinner, a festival, a romantic visit, or perhaps a secret meeting beneath the stars, preparation was almost an art form, and like most Roman arts, could take a while. For many Romans, especially those who could afford a little free time, the journey toward an evening out often began at the public baths. Now, the Roman baths were not simply places to get clean. They were one of the greatest social inventions in the ancient world. Imagine walking through tall stone entrances where warm air wrapped around you almost immediately. Marble floors reflected soft afternoon light. Water echoed gently beneath high ceilings. Friends greeted one another. Merchants quietly discussed business. Philosophers tried solving life's biggest questions while sitting in hot water. Whether they actually solved anything, history remains politely silent. Bathing usually followed a comfortable rhythm. First came light exercise. Some men played ball games in the courtyard while others stretched or wrestled. Women, depending on the place and local customs, also enjoyed dedicated bathing areas where they could relax away from the busy streets. Afterward came warm rooms filled with gentle steam. Muscles slowly loosened. Dust from the city's roads disappeared. The noise of the day faded into quiet conversation. Instead of soap as we know it today, Romans often rubbed olive oil across their skin. Then servants, or sometimes the bathers themselves, used a curved bronze tool called a strigil to gently scrape away the oil along with sweat and dirt. It sounds slightly unusual today, but remarkably, it worked rather well. Once clean, many Romans finished with cool water before drying themselves in soft linen cloths. The result was fresh skin carrying the faint scent of olive oil rather than the smoke and dust collected throughout the day. From there, attention turned toward fragrance. Romans absolutely loved perfume. Flowers, herbs, spices, and precious oils arrived from every corner of the empire. Roses from Egypt, lavender, iris, cinnamon from distant trade routes, frankincense and myrrh carried across deserts by long caravans. Small glass bottles held perfumes worth impressive amounts of money. A few careful drops were enough. Nobody wanted to smell like they had accidentally fallen into an entire garden. Perfumed oils were rubbed onto wrists, necks, hair, and sometimes clothing. Wealthy households even scented dining rooms before important guests arrived. Imagine stepping into a room where soft lamplight danced across painted walls, while the air carried hints of roses, cedarwood, and warm spices. Rather pleasant, really. Next came the hair. Roman hairstyles could be wonderfully creative. Simple styles remained common among ordinary women, but wealthier ladies sometimes transformed their hair into astonishing towers of curls, braids, loops, and carefully arranged waves that seemed determined to challenge gravity itself. Thankfully, skilled enslaved hairdressers often handled the difficult work, because trying to build one of those hairstyles yourself was probably an excellent way to lose both your patience and several strands of hair. Hairpins made from bone, bronze, silver, ivory, and even gold held everything securely in place. Some women added ribbons. Others wore delicate nets woven with fine thread. Pearls occasionally sparkled among carefully arranged curls. Roman men generally preferred simpler grooming. Most kept their hair relatively short and their beards neatly trimmed. although fashions changed over the centuries. A clean shave often suggested discipline and refinement, while later emperors helped popularize fuller beards that projected wisdom and maturity. Fashion, it seems, has always enjoyed changing its mind. Cosmetics completed the transformation. Roman women used surprisingly sophisticated beauty products. Face powders made the skin appear lighter, a fashionable sign that someone spent less time working beneath the hot sun. Soft color touched the cheeks. Natural pigments added gentle shades to the lips. Dark powders highlighted eyebrows and eyelashes, making the eyes appear larger beneath the warm glow of evening lamps. Nothing overly dramatic. The goal was elegance rather than spectacle. Although, just like today, some people certainly ignored that advice. Clothing followed. Fresh linen tunics replaced garments worn throughout the day's work. Wealthier Romans selected beautifully woven wool dyed in rich colors that reflected both taste and social standing. A married Roman woman often wore the graceful stola, a long flowing garment that draped softly from the shoulders, falling in elegant folds toward the ground. Over it she might wear a light shawl called a palla, useful for warmth, modesty, or simply adding another layer of refined style. When walking through lamplit streets, the gentle movement of these fabrics created an almost dreamlike elegance. Roman men commonly dressed in clean tunics for ordinary evenings. On formal occasions, some wore the famous toga, though despite its reputation, many Romans probably considered it slightly uncomfortable. The toga was impressive. It was also large, heavy, and required enough careful folding that putting one on sometimes felt like wrestling an especially stubborn bedsheet. Jewelry added the final touches. Gold necklaces rested against linen collars. Delicate bracelets circled graceful wrists. Emeralds, garnets, pearls, and carved gemstones reflected tiny flames from nearby oil lamps. Wedding rings quietly reminded everyone of promises already made. Some jewelry carried sentimental value rather than enormous wealth. A family gift passed through generations, a charm believed to bring protection, or a keepsake exchanged between lovers. Not every treasure needed to sparkle. Finally came the sandals. Simple leather footwear protected feet from rough stone streets while remaining comfortable enough for evening walks. Some sandals were plain. Others featured colorful straps, decorative stitching, or finely worked leather for wealthier owners. Practicality and beauty managed to walk together quite nicely. By now, Rome itself had almost finished preparing. The sky deepened into shades of blue so dark they nearly became black. The first stars quietly appeared above temple roofs. Oil lamps glowed behind open windows, and music drifted through the cooling air. Across the city, thousands of people stepped outside. Some were heading toward elegant dinner parties where poetry, music, and wine would fill the evening. Others simply visited neighbors to share conversation after another long day. Young couples hoped for a few peaceful moments together beneath the gentle darkness, where words somehow felt easier to speak than they did beneath the bright afternoon sun. And somewhere, perhaps just around the next corner, two people caught one another's eyes for the very first time. A smile, a lingering glance, nothing more, for now. Because in ancient Rome, just like today, sometimes the most memorable part of getting ready for the evening wasn't the perfume, the jewelry, or the carefully arranged hair. It was wondering who might be waiting when you finally walked through the door. By the time darkness settled gently over Rome, the city seemed softer. The heat of the day had faded. Oil lamps glowed behind windows like tiny golden stars. The busy streets of the afternoon became quieter, leaving behind only the gentle sounds of footsteps distant laughter, splashing fountains, and somewhere nearby, a musician patiently trying to convince a lyre to stay in tune. If daylight belonged to work, the evening belonged to people. And for many Romans, that meant love. Not always the dramatic kind sung by poets or carved into marble statues. More often, it was found in ordinary moments. A husband returning home with fresh bread tucked beneath his arm. A wife saving the sweetest figs for someone she cared about. Two young people walking a little slower than necessary because neither wanted the conversation to end. History often remembers great battles. It forgets that someone, somewhere, was probably holding another person's hand while those battles were happening. Courtship in ancient Rome looked rather different depending on wealth, family, and social class. Among the upper classes, marriage was rarely based only on romance. Families carefully arranged many matches to strengthen friendships, build political alliances, or protect wealth. Love, if it arrived, often came later. Sometimes it did. Sometimes it didn't. Yet that doesn't mean affection was missing from Roman marriages. Letters, poems, and inscriptions left behind by ordinary Romans reveal something surprisingly familiar. People missed each other. They worried when loved ones were away. They laughed together. They mourned deeply when someone died. The Roman heart, it turns out, behaved much like ours. Young, unmarried couples had fewer opportunities to spend time alone. Respectable families usually kept a careful watch over daughters, especially those from wealthy households. A father was expected to protect the family's honor, and that often meant limiting private meetings. Still, young people have always been remarkably creative. A glance across a crowded festival, a smile exchanged at the public baths, a few quiet words while passing a neighborhood fountain. Sometimes that was enough to begin an entire love story. Evening walks offered one of the safest chances for conversation. The streets remained lively enough that no one stood out, yet calm enough that two people could actually hear one another without shouting over merchants selling fish, which was probably a welcome improvement. Imagine strolling beneath a sky full of stars while cool evening air drifted through narrow streets. Lamps flickered outside doorways. The smell of warm bread mixed with roses growing in courtyard gardens. Somewhere nearby, someone laughed. Somewhere else, someone quietly fell in love. Of course, not every romance unfolded beneath moonlight. Many Romans gathered for evening dinners with friends and relatives. These meals could last for hours. Guests reclined on comfortable couches around low tables while servants brought course after course. Bread still warm from the oven, olives, cheeses, roasted vegetables, seafood, fruit, honey cakes, and generous cups of watered wine. Conversation flowed almost as freely as the wine. Poetry might be recited. Music filled the room. Guests debated philosophy, politics, or whether someone's cooking had actually improved since last month. Some discussions were undoubtedly more useful than others. A charming guest who could tell stories, appreciate poetry, or play music often became the center of attention. Romans admired intelligence nearly as much as beauty, sometimes even more. A quick mind could be surprisingly attractive. The poets certainly thought so. Few writers captured Roman love better than the poet Ovid. His playful verses described stolen glances, nervous excitement, secret meetings, and the delightful confusion that often accompanies attraction. He wrote about flirting almost as if it were a game, one requiring patience, confidence, and occasionally the courage not to say something embarrassing. A difficult skill. Then, as now, not every relationship fits society's ideal. Some romances remain secret because of differences in social class. A wealthy citizen might fall for someone whose family held far less status. An enslaved person could form deep emotional bonds despite having almost no control over their own future. Life rarely followed perfect rules, even when Roman law tried very hard to create them. Love had an inconvenient habit of ignoring legal paperwork. Married couples often shared quieter moments after the evening meal. Once children slept and household duties finally ended, husbands and wives could simply enjoy one another's company. Ancient writers occasionally mention couples reading together, discussing family matters, sharing memories, or planning for tomorrow. Sometimes affection required no grand gesture at all. Just conversation, just presence, just knowing someone had chosen to spend another ordinary evening beside you. Physical intimacy was naturally part of many Roman marriages as well. Roman society generally viewed sexual relationships within marriage as a normal and healthy part of family life, especially when connected with companionship and raising children. Ancient medical writers even discussed the importance of mutual health within marriage, though their understanding of the human body was not always entirely accurate. Medicine has thankfully improved over the past 2,000 years, even if some waiting rooms still feel just as long. Beyond private homes, festivals often continued after sunset. Music echoed through temple courtyards. People danced. Neighbors shared food. Young men searched for excuses to speak with young women. Young women sometimes pretended not to notice. Sometimes they genuinely didn't. Ancient flirting could be every bit as wonderfully confusing as modern flirting. Meanwhile, musicians wandered through streets entertaining small crowds. The soft sound of flutes mixed with gentle drums and stringed instruments. A talented singer might gather listeners outside a tavern. Children chased one another between adults. Older couples watched with knowing smiles, perhaps remembering evenings from their own youth. Across Rome, thousands of tiny stories unfolded at once. A husband returning safely from travel. A bride preparing for her first night in a new household. Two neighbors slowly realizing friendship had quietly become something deeper. A widow remembering someone she still loved. A young poet desperately searching for better words than the ones he had already written. He probably failed. Most poets believe the next sentence will finally be perfect. It rarely is. As the hours passed, the streets grew calmer. Some couples returned home hand in hand beneath the soft glow of oil lamps. Others lingered a little longer beside public fountains where moonlight shimmered across gently moving water. No emperor noticed them. No historian recorded their names. Yet they were every bit as much a part of Rome's story as senators and generals. Because beneath the marble temples and towering monuments lived millions of ordinary people who wanted the same simple things humans have always wanted. Someone to laugh with. Someone to trust. Someone whose face felt comforting at the end of a long day. The Roman world could be harsh. Life was uncertain. Disease, war, and hardship often arrived without warning. Perhaps that made these quiet evenings even more precious. A shared meal, a whispered joke, a lingering embrace before sleep. Small moments that reminded people life contained beauty as well as struggle. As the lamps burned lower and more windows quietly closed, many lovers disappeared behind wooden doors, leaving the streets to night watchmen, late travelers, musicians, and those whose evening was only just beginning. Because while respectable households settled into peaceful routines, another side of Rome was preparing to wake. And behind many ordinary-looking doorways, the night held far more secrets than daylight ever revealed. By now, the streets outside have grown quieter. The merchants have gone home. The last children have finally stopped playing in the alleys. Oil lamps flicker behind wooden shutters, turning ordinary houses into warm little islands of light in the middle of the dark city. Step through one of those doors, not into the palace of an emperor, not into the grand villa of a senator, just an ordinary Roman home, because this is where most Romans spent their nights. For wealthy families, entering the house after sunset felt almost magical. The atrium, the main hall, glowed with dozens of small bronze lamps. Their soft flames reflected across polished marble floors and painted walls covered with colorful frescoes. Images of gardens, birds, sea creatures, and mythological gods seemed almost alive as the light danced across them. A shallow pool in the center of the room quietly reflected the flickering lamps above. Everything felt peaceful. Almost. Somewhere in the background, a servant was probably still looking for something the master had misplaced earlier that afternoon. Certain household traditions are older than history itself. Beyond the atrium lay more private rooms. A dining room where the evening meal had only recently ended. A small household shrine where family members offered a brief prayer and thanked the household gods for another safe day. Storage rooms filled with jars of olive oil, grain, wine, and dried fruit. And finally, the bedrooms. Roman bedrooms, known as cubicula, were usually much smaller than people imagine. Even in expensive homes, they were designed mainly for sleeping rather than spending long hours relaxing. Most had very little furniture, a wooden bed, perhaps a small chest, a stool, maybe a shelf holding a lamp or a few treasured possessions. That was often enough. The mattress itself might be stuffed with wool, reeds, feathers, or dried straw, depending on the family's wealth. Soft blankets and linen sheets provided comfort during cooler nights. By modern standards, the beds were simple, but after walking miles across stone streets all day, they probably felt wonderful. Privacy, however, was another matter. Roman houses were rarely silent. Even after everyone settled down, sounds traveled easily. A baby crying in the next room, someone coughing, quiet conversations, the creaking of wooden furniture, the distant bark of a neighborhood dog, and somewhere outside, a wagon driver almost certainly choosing the noisiest possible route home. If you lived in one of Rome's crowded apartment buildings, called insulae, privacy became even harder to find. Entire families often shared a single room. Parents, children, sometimes grandparents, sometimes other relatives. Everyone slept close together because there was little choice. Curtains occasionally separated sleeping spaces, but walls were thin and neighbors remained, well, neighbors. You quickly became familiar with everyone's daily routine, whether you wanted to or not. As evening settled in, families often gathered one last time before bed. Parents asked children about their day. Older relatives shared stories from years gone by. Someone repaired a sandal. Someone else mended clothing by the light of a tiny oil lamp. These quiet moments rarely appeared in great historical texts, yet they formed the heartbeat of Roman family life. Many households also included enslaved people. Their evenings looked very different. While the family relaxed, many enslaved workers were still busy. Some cleaned the dining room after guests had left. Others extinguished unnecessary lamps to save expensive olive oil. Kitchen workers washed dishes. Personal attendants prepared clothing for the following morning. Hairdressers carefully stored combs and jewelry. Only after every task was complete could many of them finally rest. Their lives remind us that the comfort enjoyed by wealthy Romans often depended upon the hard work of others who possessed very little freedom. It is an important part of Rome's story, one that should never be forgotten. As the night deepened, the household slowly prepared for sleep. Oil lamps required careful attention. Leaving one burning unattended inside a wooden house was a dangerous idea. Fire remained one of Rome's greatest fears. Entire neighborhoods could disappear beneath flames if a single accident spread through crowded streets. So before bed, many lamps were extinguished. Only one or two remained glowing softly. Their gentle light guided anyone needing to move through the house during the night. In one corner of the home stood the family shrine, the lararium. Nearly every Roman household, whether rich or modest, honored protective household spirits known as the Laras and Penates. Before sleeping, family members often paused for a quiet moment. Perhaps they offered a pinch of incense, perhaps a small piece of bread, perhaps only a whispered prayer asking for protection through the night. The ceremony lasted only a minute, but it connected the household with generations who had performed the very same ritual. Night also brought another, much more personal side of married life. Once children had fallen asleep and servants finished their duties, husbands and wives finally enjoyed something rather precious: time alone. Roman marriages varied enormously. Some were affectionate, some were distant, some grew into deep partnerships after beginning as arranged unions. Ancient letters and tomb inscriptions show husbands praising wives for kindness, loyalty, humor, and companionship. Likewise, wives mourned husbands not only as providers, but as beloved partners whose absence left homes feeling painfully empty. Behind closed doors, couples talked quietly about tomorrow's plans. Money, children, family news, perhaps dreams of buying a larger house one day, or simply hoping next year's harvest would be better than the last. Physical intimacy was naturally part of many marriages. Unlike the exaggerated stories often told about ancient Rome, most married couples experienced intimacy as one part of ordinary domestic life rather than endless luxury or wild excess. The bedroom was a private space for affection, comfort, and closeness between partners. No marble statues, no dramatic orchestra, just two people ending another ordinary day together. Sometimes history becomes more beautiful when it is less dramatic. Not every Roman went to bed early. Students continued reading by lamplight. Merchants counted coins one final time. Writers scratched notes onto wax tablets before inspiration disappeared. Doctors prepared medicines. Midwives remained ready in case someone nearby entered labor before sunrise. Rome never completely slept. Somebody was always awake. Outside, the sounds continued. Night watchmen called the passing hours. Footsteps echoed across stone streets. A distant tavern erupted with laughter before becoming quiet once again. Water flowed endlessly through public fountains fed by magnificent aqueducts. The city seemed to breathe, slowly, steadily, peacefully. As families drifted into sleep, dreams replaced conversation. Children imagined heroic adventures. Parents worried about tomorrow. Older Romans remembered yesterday, and above every rooftop stretched the same sky filled with stars that watched over emperors, laborers, slaves, merchants, lovers, widows, newborn babies, and tired old men alike. Inside these modest bedrooms, far away from political speeches and military victories, ancient Rome revealed its truest self. Not a city of marble alone, but a city of families, of whispered goodnights, of flickering lamps, of quiet embraces, of ordinary people finding warmth and comfort before another sunrise called them back into the busy world. Outside, however, the night was far from over. The lamps inside Roman homes were growing dim. But across the city's taverns, wine shops, and entertainment districts, the evening was only beginning to reach its liveliest hours. While families settled beneath warm blankets and the gentle glow of fading oil lamps, another Rome was becoming wonderfully alive. Follow the sound of laughter. Walk past the quiet houses. Turn down a narrow stone street where the air carries the rich smell of roasted meat, fresh bread, smoke, and spilled wine. You've arrived at a Roman tavern. The wooden door stands wide open despite the late hour. Golden lamplight spills onto the street, inviting anyone with a few coins, and perhaps a good story, to step inside. Immediately, the atmosphere changes. The room is warm, busy, comfortably noisy. Clay cups clink together. Dice bounce across rough wooden tables. Someone bursts into laughter before anyone else understands the joke. A musician sits near the corner, gently playing a flute while trying very hard to ignore a customer enthusiastically singing several notes away from the proper melody. The wine probably sounds better than he does. Roman taverns, often called Pompeii or taberni, could be found almost everywhere. Some were little more than a counter opening directly onto the street, serving quick meals to workers who didn't have kitchens at home. Others were larger gathering places where travelers, merchants, sailors, laborers, and curious neighbors lingered long after sunset. These were not elegant banquet halls for senators reclining on expensive couches. This was the Rome of ordinary people, a place where dusty sandals were perfectly acceptable. The menu was simple but satisfying. Fresh bread, cheese, olives, salted fish, lentil stew, roasted sausages, eggs, nuts, sometimes oysters or seafood if the city markets had enjoyed a particularly good day. Nothing too fancy, just honest food after honest work. Although judging by some ancient complaints, not every tavern owner shared the same enthusiastic relationship with cleanliness. Best not to inspect the kitchen too closely. Wine, however, was everywhere. Romans loved it. Morning, afternoon, evening, celebrations, business meetings, family dinners. Wine appeared at nearly every occasion. Yet Roman wine tasted rather different from the bottles lining modern shelves. It was usually mixed with water before drinking. Serving unmixed wine was often considered uncivilized, almost like announcing to everyone that making sensible decisions wasn't your highest priority. Different herbs, spices, flowers, or even honey could be added to create new flavors. Some wines were sweet, others dry, some expensive enough for wealthy patrons, others affordable enough for laborers finishing another long day. A skilled tavern keeper knew exactly what regular customers preferred. Ah, Marcus is here. Better bring the watered red before he starts telling everyone how he almost joined the army. Again, for the 15th time, conversations flowed as smoothly as the wine. Merchants discussed prices for next week's grain. Sailors shared stories from distant ports across the Mediterranean. Craftsmen debated whose trade required the hardest work. Naturally, each believed it was their own. Politics entered the conversation now and then, usually after the second cup, sometimes the third. Ancient writers often joked that wine made every Roman an expert on governing the empire. 2,000 years later, some things remain remarkably familiar. Dice games were especially popular. Small cubes carved from bone or ivory rolled across wooden tables while players cheered lucky throws and blamed spectacularly unlucky ones on fortune, fate, or perhaps the suspicious expression on the man sitting opposite. Gambling laws existed. People simply became rather creative about ignoring them. Fortunately for historians, human beings have always been wonderfully inventive when bending rules they don't particularly enjoy. Music filled many taverns throughout the evening. A traveling musician might play a lyre while another accompanied with a flute. Occasionally, dancers entertained guests. Not grand theatrical performances. Just enough music to make the room feel warmer and the conversations last a little longer. Songs ranged from heroic tales to playful drinking tunes that everyone seemed to know. Even those who couldn't carry a tune confidently carried the chorus. Late into the evening, travelers especially appreciated these lively places. Rome welcomed visitors from every corner of its enormous empire. One table might include a merchant from Egypt, a soldier from Gaul, a sailor from Greece, and a trader from Syria, each bringing different languages, customs, and stories. Imagine listening to tales of deserts stretching beyond the horizon, snow-covered mountains, storms at sea, markets overflowing with spices, cities whose names sounded wonderfully mysterious. For someone who had never left Italy, a tavern could become a window onto the entire known world. Of course, not everyone visited only for food and conversation. Some hoped to make business connections. Others searched for companionship. Loneliness did not disappear simply because someone lived in the greatest city of the ancient world. Sometimes all a person wanted was another human being willing to listen for an hour over a shared cup of wine. The tavern offered that chance. Roman writers occasionally looked down upon taverns, describing them as noisy places filled with questionable characters and poor decisions. There was probably some truth to that. Arguments certainly happened. A game of dice could become surprisingly serious. Someone occasionally drank too much and confidently announced ideas that sounded much wiser before the fourth cup of wine. Tavern owners likely became experts at gently encouraging certain customers to head home before they accidentally challenged a table to a philosophical debate they were destined to lose. Still, most evenings were peaceful. People laughed. They relaxed. They forgot tomorrow's worries for a little while. And perhaps that was reason enough to come. As the hours passed, the atmosphere slowly changed. Early evening belonged mostly to workers finishing dinner. Later came entertainers, musicians, travelers arriving after dark, and young men eager to continue the night. The lamps burned lower. Fresh jugs of wine replaced empty ones. Outside, the streets grew quieter, making the sounds inside each tavern feel even warmer. If you stepped back into the night air, you would notice something interesting. Not every street echoed with laughter. Rome's nightlife was uneven. One neighborhood slept peacefully, while another remained full of music, conversation, and flickering lights. Somewhere nearby, a wealthy household still hosted an elegant banquet. Elsewhere, a family had already fallen asleep. And just beyond the taverns, another district was becoming increasingly busy. Women adjusted elegant shawls. Oil lamps were trimmed a little brighter. Wooden doors quietly opened. Some visitors arrived nervously, others confidently. Coins changed hands. Soft voices welcomed familiar faces. Because for many Romans, the tavern was not the final destination of the evening. It was simply the place where the night truly began. Beyond the cheerful noise of wine cups and friendly conversation waited another world. One that ancient writers described with curiosity, moral judgment, amusement, and sometimes surprising honesty. A world where desire, money, loneliness, and companionship often met beneath the same small flame of an oil lamp. And that is where our journey will lead next. As the night grows deeper, leave the warm noise of the tavern behind. The music becomes quieter with every step. The laughter fades into the distance. Ahead, another part of Rome waits beneath the glow of scattered oil lamps. The streets here are still busy, but in a different way. People move with purpose. Some look around carefully before entering a doorway. Others walk confidently, already familiar with the neighborhood. This is the world of Roman prostitution. It is one of the most talked about parts of ancient Rome. It is also one of the most misunderstood. Modern films often imagine it as a city filled with endless pleasure and constant temptation, where every street corner promised another dramatic love affair. The reality was far less glamorous and far more human. Prostitution was legal in much of Roman society. It was not hidden away as some people imagine, nor was it treated as an equal profession to respectable marriage. Instead, it occupied a strange place somewhere between acceptance and social stigma. Most Romans knew it existed. Many used its services. Few openly admired the people who worked there. Roman law even required many prostitutes to register with local officials. Once registered, that legal status usually remained for life, even if a woman later left the profession and built a completely different life. It was a harsh rule. A single decision could follow someone forever. For many women, prostitution was not a glamorous choice. It was an economic one. Some had been born into slavery and were ordered by their owners to work in brothels. Others had been freed but possessed few opportunities to earn enough money to survive. Some were widows. Others had arrived in Rome from distant provinces with little family support and even fewer resources. History rarely preserves their individual names, but archaeology reminds us they were real people with real lives. Every evening followed a familiar rhythm. As daylight faded, women carefully prepared themselves before work. Hair was brushed and arranged. Perfume was applied. Fresh clothing replaced garments worn during the day. Jewelry caught the light of nearby oil lamps, not always because it was expensive, but because even inexpensive bronze could sparkle beautifully in the right light. Appearance mattered. Not because every client expected extraordinary beauty, but because first impressions have always mattered in human relationships. Some prostitutes wore colorful garments designed to stand out in busy streets. Ancient writers sometimes claimed prostitutes dressed differently from respectable married women, though historians continue debating how consistently those descriptions reflected everyday reality. Like many Roman authors, moral lessons occasionally became more important than careful observation. Clients came from almost every level of society: laborers, traveling merchants, soldiers on leave, sailors waiting for favorable winds, young bachelors, even wealthy citizens who preferred to keep certain parts of their lives separate from their households. Loneliness, after all, does not ask how much money someone owns. Some customers sought physical intimacy. Others simply wanted company. Ancient graffiti discovered in places like Pompeii occasionally records conversations, compliments, jokes, and even complaints that sound surprisingly familiar today. One visitor praised a woman for her kindness. Another complained about prices. Someone else left behind an opinion that historians probably wish had been slightly more poetic. The walls of history are wonderfully honest. Money varied enormously. Simple encounters might cost only a few small bronze coins, making them affordable for ordinary workers. Courtesans who served wealthy patrons, however, could earn vastly larger sums through companionship, conversation, music, or long-term relationships. Their world was quite different from that of women working in ordinary brothels. We'll meet them later. For now, we remain with the women whose lives were often far more difficult. Most earned only enough to continue living. Room rent, food, clothing, payments demanded by owners or managers. Very little remained afterward. Many prostitutes did not control their own income. Those who were enslaved legally belonged to someone else. Everything they earned passed first through another person's hands. Freedom itself often depended upon saving enough money to eventually purchase it, a goal that remained painfully distant for many. Their working hours usually stretched late into the night. When respectable households had already gone to sleep, these streets often remained active. Oil lamps flickered above doorways. Voices stayed low. Sandals echoed across worn stone streets. A customer entered. Another quietly left. Then the street became calm again for a few moments before repeating the same pattern. Despite the common stereotypes, Roman prostitution was not always loud or theatrical. Many encounters were brief, businesslike, almost ordinary. Not every conversation was flirtatious. Sometimes negotiations lasted longer than the meeting itself. Human beings have apparently always enjoyed discussing prices. Health remained a constant concern. Without modern medicine, sexually transmitted infections existed, although Romans understood them very poorly. Ancient medical writers offered treatments using herbs, oils, minerals, and countless remedies that ranged from sensible to deeply optimistic. Cleanliness, frequent bathing, and perfumed oils were valued, but they could only do so much. Pregnancy presented another serious reality. Women working in prostitution faced significant risks, and ancient texts mention herbal mixtures believed to prevent or end pregnancies. Some may have had limited effects. Others were dangerous. Many were simply based on hope rather than medical knowledge. The uncertainty itself must have been exhausting. Roman society often judged these women harshly while continuing to rely upon their existence. It was an uncomfortable contradiction. Politicians publicly praised traditional family values. Poets wrote romantic verses celebrating faithful wives. Yet the city's brothels remained open, legal, and frequently visited. Human societies have always possessed a remarkable ability to hold two conflicting ideas at exactly the same time. Some prostitutes eventually managed to leave the profession. A few purchased their freedom. Others married. Some opened taverns or small businesses. But for many, life remained difficult from beginning to end. Archaeology gives us only fragments. A scratched name, a forgotten necklace, a broken oil lamp, a small room where someone once waited for another customer beneath the same stars we still see today. It is easy to reduce history to statistics or sensational stories. It is harder, and perhaps more important, to remember the people. The young woman far from home, the widow trying to survive, the enslaved girl who never truly had a choice, the older worker wondering how many more years her body could endure long nights. They rarely appear in grand monuments, yet they were part of Rome every bit as much as senators, generals, and emperors. As midnight approaches, the streets grow a little quieter. A few lamps burn lower. Some women finally close their doors for the night. Others continue waiting. Across the city, life goes on. But there is one place where the evidence of these lives survives more clearly than almost anywhere else in the ancient world. Not in a poem, not in a law, but in stone. In the ash-covered streets of Pompeii, an entire Roman brothel remained preserved beneath volcanic ash, waiting nearly 2,000 years to tell its story. And in our next chapter, we will quietly step inside one of the best-preserved brothels of the ancient world, where archaeology speaks more honestly than legend ever could. The streets are quieter now. Midnight has passed. Most families are asleep behind closed wooden shutters. Oil lamps burn low in bedroom windows, and only the occasional dog breaks the silence with a lazy bark somewhere in the distance. But one doorway is still open. It isn't grand. There are no marble columns, no elegant gardens, no expensive fountains welcoming wealthy guests. In fact, if you walked past it during the day, you might hardly notice it at all. Welcome to one of the most famous buildings in the ancient Roman world. Not because emperors lived here, but because ordinary people did. Today, we know it simply as the Lupanar of Pompeii. When eruption of Mount Vesuvius buried Pompeii beneath meters of volcanic ash in AD 79, the disaster froze an ordinary evening in remarkable detail. Nearly 2,000 years later, archaeologists uncovered streets, homes, taverns, bakeries, workshops, and one of the best-preserved Roman brothels ever discovered. It gives us an unusually honest glimpse into a world that ancient writers often described with judgment but rarely with much sympathy. From the outside, the building looks surprisingly modest. Stone walls, a simple entrance, nothing especially dramatic. Business here relied less on grand architecture and more on location. The brothel stood close to busy streets where travelers, merchants, sailors, and local residents regularly passed by. Convenience has always been good for business. Step inside. The first thing you notice is how small everything feels. The hallway is narrow. The ceilings are low. The air is warm, carrying the faint scent of smoke from oil lamps mixed with old plaster and wood. This is not a luxurious palace of pleasure. It is a workplace. Along each side of the corridor sit tiny rooms. Archaeologists counted them carefully. Each room contains little more than a built-in stone bed. A thin mattress would once have rested on top, probably stuffed with straw or wool. There might have been a blanket, perhaps a small wooden stool. Very little else. The rooms were practical. Comfort was not the priority. Imagine lying on a stone platform after working long hours. Suddenly, your own mattress seems considerably more impressive. Each doorway opened directly onto the hallway. Privacy was limited. People came and went throughout the evening while lamps flickered overhead, casting moving shadows across rough plaster walls. Those lamps played an important role. Without electricity, every room depended on small clay or bronze oil lamps burning olive oil. Their light was soft rather than bright. Faces appeared warm and golden. Corners disappeared into gentle darkness. The atmosphere probably felt quieter than many modern people imagine. Ancient brothels were not necessarily filled with constant shouting or loud music. Most interactions were brief. Voices stayed relatively low. Outside, the city continued its ordinary rhythm. One of the most fascinating discoveries inside the Lupanar hangs above the room entrances. Paintings, small frescoes, they depict couples embracing in various intimate positions. For many years, people assumed these images functioned almost like a visual menu. Perhaps they did. Some historians, however, believe they may also have served decorative purposes or reflected common Roman artistic themes surrounding love and sexuality. The truth remains uncertain. History sometimes prefers asking interesting questions rather than providing comfortable answers. Then there are the walls themselves. Ancient Romans loved writing graffiti, and fortunately for modern historians, they wrote on almost everything. The brothel walls preserve dozens of scratched messages left by visitors and workers alike. Some are simple names. Some boast about romantic adventures. Others praise particular women. A few complain. Human beings, it seems, have always felt the urge to leave reviews. Not all of them were especially polite. Some graffiti are surprisingly funny. Others are deeply touching. A handful simply remind us that ordinary people wanted to leave some small sign that they had once existed. I was here. Sometimes that is enough. Archaeologists have also learned about prices. The evidence suggests that many services cost only a few bronze coins, affordable enough that ordinary laborers could visit occasionally. Of course, affordable meant something very different depending on who you were. For a successful merchant, the cost might have seemed insignificant. For a poor worker, it could represent several hours of hard labor. Money always tells part of history's story. The people running these establishments also deserve attention. Many brothels belonged to private owners who treated them as businesses. If the women working there were enslaved, they had little control over their own lives or earnings. Managers organized schedules, collected payments, maintained the building, and ensured business continued night after night. For them, profit usually came first. Compassion, not always. Yet even within these difficult circumstances, small pieces of humanity appear. A carefully arranged hairstyle, a favorite piece of inexpensive jewelry, a friendly conversation remembered by a returning customer, shared laughter between workers during a quiet hour. History is rarely made only of suffering or only of happiness. Most lives contain both. One remarkable feature of Pompeii is how ordinary everything feels. The brothel stood only steps away from taverns, bakeries, shops, apartments, and public fountains. People buying tomorrow's bread walked the same streets as travelers searching for lodging. Children played nearby during the day. Neighbors greeted one another. Life continued. The brothel was woven into the everyday fabric of the city rather than hidden far beyond its edges. This sometimes surprises modern visitors. But ancient Roman society often approached prostitution with practical acceptance while still attaching significant social stigma to those who worked within it. Acceptance and prejudice existed side by side. It was a complicated world. Then, one late summer day in AD 79, everything changed. Mount Vesuvius erupted. Ash began falling from the sky. Buildings disappeared beneath volcanic debris. The conversations ended. The lamps went dark. The graffiti remained. The stone beds remained. The frescoes remained. An ordinary workplace became an extraordinary time capsule. Without that terrible disaster, we would know far less about the everyday lives of ordinary Romans. Sometimes history survives because of tragedy. As we quietly leave the Lupanar and step back onto Pompeii's moonlit street, it becomes easier to understand that this building was never simply about desire. It was about economics, power, loneliness, survival, and the complicated choices people make when living inside a vast, unequal empire. Not everyone who sought companionship in ancient Rome came to places like this, however. A very different world existed beyond these modest rooms. One filled with elegant banquets, poetry, philosophy, music, expensive perfume, and women whose role was not merely physical companionship but conversation, education, and influence. Their evenings unfolded beneath brighter lamps and finer ceilings. And in the next chapter, we'll meet the courtesans who moved through the highest circles of Roman society, where wit could be just as valuable as beauty, and a clever conversation might be worth far more than a handful of coins. Leave the narrow streets of Pompeii behind. Walk away from the modest brothels, the scratched graffiti, and the tiny stone rooms lit by a single oil lamp. Now imagine another part of Roman nightlife. The streets are wider, the houses larger. Bronze lamps line elegant entrances. Marble columns glow softly beneath the moonlight, while the scent of roses, myrrh, and imported incense drifts through carefully tended gardens. Somewhere inside, music has already begun. Tonight's guests are arriving. A servant quietly opens a heavy wooden door. You step into the home of a wealthy Roman. Unlike the lively taverns we visited earlier, everything here feels calm and carefully planned. Soft conversations replace loud laughter. Every lamp has been placed to flatter the room. Every flower seems perfectly arranged. Nothing appears accidental, not even the guests. The Roman elite loved banquets. These evening gatherings were far more than opportunities to enjoy expensive food. They were places where friendships were strengthened, business partnerships quietly formed, political alliances gently encouraged, and reputations carefully built. Who sat beside whom mattered, who spoke first mattered. Even who laughed at the host's jokes probably mattered more than it should have. Guests reclined comfortably on richly decorated couches surrounding low dining tables. Servants moved almost silently, carrying silver trays filled with roasted game birds, fresh seafood, olives, cheeses, figs, grapes, honey cakes, and wines imported from every corner of the empire. The room glowed with dozens of oil lamps reflected in polished bronze and marble. Outside, Rome slept. Inside, the evening had only just begun. Among these carefully chosen guests, one woman might immediately attract attention. Not because she wore the most expensive jewelry, although she might. Not because she was the youngest, or the most beautiful, though ancient writers often praised both. She attracted attention because she could hold an entire room in conversation. She was a courtesan. Unlike the women working in ordinary brothels, high-class courtesans often offered something that wealthy Roman society valued almost as much as beauty: education. Many were skilled in music, poetry, literature, philosophy, and elegant conversation. Some spoke more than one language. Others could recite famous poems from memory or discuss Greek philosophy with surprising confidence. A wealthy guest might spend hours speaking with a courtesan without any expectation of physical intimacy. Conversation itself had value, especially good conversation. Imagine sitting beside someone who could discuss the latest poem, laugh at the right moment, recommend a beautiful song, and politely win every argument without making you feel embarrassed. That was a remarkable talent, probably still is. Many elite Roman men admired Greek culture deeply. As a result, courtesans familiar with Greek literature, music, and art often became especially desirable companions at sophisticated gatherings. Beauty might capture someone's attention. Intelligence often held it. Some courtesans developed long-term relationships with wealthy patrons. These arrangements could last for years. Rather than brief meetings, they sometimes resembled ongoing partnerships built upon companionship, conversation, financial support, and mutual benefit. The emotional reality of these relationships likely varied enormously. Some may have contained genuine affection. Others remained entirely practical. Human relationships rarely fit into neat categories. Fashion also played an important role. A successful courtesan understood appearance as carefully as any modern celebrity. Fine linen draped gracefully over the body, catching the warm glow of oil lamps with every movement. Richly colored wool garments, often dyed in deep saffron, crimson, emerald, or soft violet, reflected both wealth and refined taste. Delicate gold necklaces rested against the collarbone. Pearl earrings gently moved whenever she turned her head. Bracelets softly chimed as she lifted a wine cup or adjusted a loose curl. Nothing seemed excessive. Everything seemed intentional. Perfume completed the impression. Rose, jasmine, frankincense, cinnamon, just enough fragrance to be remembered after the evening ended. Not enough to announce one's arrival from the next neighborhood. Moderation, even in luxury, had its own elegance. Conversation flowed continuously throughout the banquet. Poets recited fresh verses. Musicians played gentle melodies on the lyre and flute. Guests debated history, politics, mythology, astronomy, and occasionally subjects they understood with considerably more confidence than actual knowledge. Wine has always been wonderfully optimistic about human expertise. Laughter spread easily. Not loud laughter, refined laughter, the kind that politely suggested everyone present possessed excellent taste, or at least hoped everyone else believed so. Some courtesans became famous. Ancient writers occasionally mentioned women celebrated for wit, charm, artistic talent, or influence over powerful men. Their reputations spread far beyond a single city. Invitations followed. So did expensive gifts, jewelry, fine clothing, country villas, even houses in prestigious neighborhoods. Success, however, came with uncertainty. Youth and beauty rarely lasted forever. A wealthy patron could lose interest. Political fortunes changed quickly. Financial security often depended upon maintaining relationships in a society where women possessed limited legal independence. Luxury could disappear almost as suddenly as it arrived. Not every elegant woman attending these banquets was a courtesan, of course. Respectable wives frequently hosted dinners alongside their husbands. Elite Roman women managed households, supervised servants, raised children, and sometimes exercised considerable influence behind the scenes. The difference often lay less in appearance than in social expectations and legal status. From the outside, distinctions could appear surprisingly subtle. Roman moralists, however, enjoyed drawing much sharper lines. Ancient authors often praised modest wives while criticizing courtesans, even as those same writers happily described the banquets where courtesans were welcomed. It was another of Rome's curious contradictions. Society admired their talents, questioned their respectability. It invited them to dinner, then pretended to be shocked when they arrived. History occasionally possesses an excellent sense of irony. As the evening slowly deepened, servants cleared away empty dishes and refilled wine cups one final time. Music softened. Some guests slipped into quiet gardens where moonlight illuminated fountains and marble statues. Private conversations replaced lively debates. Perhaps a patron and a courtesan wandered slowly beneath rows of cypress trees, discussing poetry rather than politics, or perhaps simply enjoying the peaceful silence together. Not every memorable evening required endless words. Eventually, guests prepared to leave. Sandals echoed gently across polished stone floors. Farewells were exchanged. Doors quietly closed behind the last visitors. The lamps burned lower. Another elegant Roman night had come to its graceful conclusion. Yet beyond these luxurious villas, countless ordinary husbands and wives were already asleep, sharing much simpler lives. No silver dining tables, no imported perfumes, no famous poets entertaining the guests. Just homes, families, responsibilities, and the everyday work of building a life together. Because while the banquets of the wealthy were fascinating, they represented only a tiny part of Roman society. To truly understand love in ancient Rome, we must now return to the ordinary households where most Romans lived, worked, argued, laughed, raised children, and grew old together. And there, behind those modest wooden doors, we'll discover what married life was really like in the Eternal City. After wandering through taverns, brothels, and glittering banquets, let's return to a much quieter place. A home, not a palace, not a luxurious villa overlooking the sea. Just an ordinary Roman house where an oil lamp still burns softly beside the doorway, and the evening meal has only recently ended. Because despite all the exciting stories history loves to tell, most Romans spent most of their lives exactly here. At home, with family. Marriage stood at the very center of Roman society. It wasn't simply about two people falling in love. Marriage connected families, protected property, produced children, and helped maintain social stability. Parents often played an important role in choosing suitable partners, especially among wealthier households. From a modern point of view, that may sound rather unromantic. Yet arranged marriages did not automatically mean unhappy marriages. Love sometimes arrived after the wedding instead of before it, and sometimes it grew slowly, almost without either person noticing. Shared meals, shared worries, shared years. These small things have a quiet way of bringing hearts closer together. Many Roman brides married surprisingly young, often during their mid to late teenage years. Husbands were frequently older, sometimes by several years. The wedding itself could be filled with music, laughter, family gatherings, and religious rituals. Friends celebrated. Neighbors watched. Children probably ran around causing just enough chaos to remind everyone that ceremonies rarely go exactly as planned. Some traditions never grow old. When the celebration finally ended, the bride was escorted to her husband's home. Ancient writers describe guests carrying torches through the evening streets while singing cheerful wedding songs. It must have been a beautiful sight, golden flames dancing beneath a sky filled with stars. A young couple beginning an entirely new chapter together. Inside the household, married life quickly settled into familiar routines. The husband usually managed legal affairs, property, and business outside the home. The wife supervised the household itself. She organized food supplies, oversaw servants if the family could afford them, managed clothing, planned meals, and helped raise children. This was not a small responsibility. Running a Roman household required organization, patience, and no small amount of diplomacy, especially if several generations lived under one roof. Roman women, particularly in later centuries of the empire, often enjoyed more independence than people sometimes imagine. Many owned property. Some managed businesses. Others handled family finances while husbands traveled or served in government. Ancient inscriptions even celebrate women for their intelligence, generosity, and practical wisdom. History has a habit of remembering powerful men. Stone inscriptions quietly remind us powerful women were there too. Daily affection rarely looked dramatic. It lived in ordinary gestures. A husband bringing home fresh fruit because he knew his wife enjoyed figs. A wife repairing her husband's favorite tunic before it became too worn to save. Parents comforting a frightened child after a nightmare. Brothers teasing sisters. grandparents telling stories that had somehow become longer every single year. Family life sounded remarkably familiar. Roman tombstones tell us something surprisingly touching. Many husbands described their wives using words like faithful, gentle, kind, devoted, and beloved. Many wives expressed equally deep affection for husbands they had lost. One inscription simply mourns a spouse taken too soon, speaking with a sadness that feels almost modern. Across 2,000 years, grief speaks the same language. Children transformed Roman homes into wonderfully busy places. They laughed, argued, played games with knucklebones, chased one another through courtyards, asked endless questions, and almost certainly ignored instructions they had already heard several times. Parents taught children practical skills from an early age. Girls often learned spinning, weaving, cooking, and household management. Boys studied reading, writing, mathematics, or trained in family trades depending upon their social class. Education varied greatly. Wealth opened many doors. Poverty often closed them. Evenings brought the family together again. Once work ended and dinner was finished, people finally had time simply to exist with one another. Stories were shared. Plans for tomorrow were discussed. Someone laughed at a memory from years ago. Someone worried about next month's harvest. Life moved gently between hope and uncertainty. Physical intimacy naturally formed an important part of marriage. Roman society generally expected husbands and wives to enjoy a healthy relationship that strengthened the family and, when possible, produced children. Ancient poets occasionally celebrated romantic desire within marriage, while medical writers discussed intimacy in surprisingly practical terms. Reality probably fell somewhere between poetry and medicine, as it often does. Of course, not every marriage was happy. Arguments happened. Money caused stress. Illness tested patience. Some couples simply proved poorly matched despite everyone's best intentions. Roman law eventually made divorce relatively straightforward compared with many other ancient societies. While divorce carried emotional and social consequences, it was neither rare nor impossible. Some marriages ended quietly. Others ended dramatically enough to keep neighbors talking for months. Human nature has always appreciated a little gossip. Yet many marriages endured for decades. Partners grew older together, raised children, buried parents, welcomed grandchildren, shared both good harvests and difficult winters. Love became less about excitement and more about trust. About knowing someone would still be sitting beside you after life's many storms had passed. Family celebrations filled the calendar. Birthdays, religious festivals, weddings, the birth of a child, a successful harvest. Even simple dinners became opportunities to strengthen the bonds that held households together. The Roman home was more than a building. It was a small community, one where several generations often lived beneath the same roof, sharing responsibilities, memories, and hopes for the future. Outside those walls, Rome could be unpredictable. Politics shifted. Emperors came and went. Wars erupted far beyond the city. Disease sometimes spread without warning. But inside the home, families tried to create something steady. A place where children felt safe, where aging parents were cared for, where husbands and wives found comfort after another demanding day. As the last lamp burned lower and quiet settled over the house, parents checked on sleeping children one final time. Blankets were gently adjusted, doors quietly closed. The city beyond continued its restless rhythm, but inside, the family rested together beneath the same roof. For many Romans, this was happiness. Not perfect happiness, simply ordinary happiness. And perhaps that is the kind that lasts the longest. Yet every family also hoped for something else. Healthy children, safe pregnancies, successful births. These hopes shaped the lives of nearly every Roman household, leading women to seek the wisdom of midwives, physicians, old family traditions, and sometimes a little help from the gods themselves. So, as another peaceful Roman night continues, our next stop takes us into one of the most intimate and important parts of ancient life, the world of women's health, childbirth, fertility, and family planning, where science, tradition, and belief often walked hand in hand. As the city grows quieter, another kind of work continues behind closed doors. It is not the cheerful noise of a tavern, not the elegant conversation of a banquet, not even the peaceful rhythm of a family settling down for sleep. Instead, it is quieter still. A woman breathes slowly while another woman gently holds her hand. An oil lamp flickers on a nearby table. A bowl of warm water waits beside clean linen cloths. Somewhere outside, a fountain continues its endless song. Inside, a new life is about to begin. Childbirth was one of the most important and most dangerous moments in a Roman woman's life. Today, many births take place in hospitals with trained doctors, modern medicine, and equipment that ancient people could never have imagined. Roman families had something different. They had midwives. These experienced women were among the most respected female professionals in Roman society. Some learned through years of practical experience, while others studied medical writings and techniques passed down through generations. A skilled midwife needed calm hands, sharp eyes, and perhaps most importantly, a reassuring voice, because bringing a child into the world has always required courage. Ancient medical writers describe midwives carrying small collections of tools, clean cloths, oils, and herbal medicines. They carefully watched the mother's condition, offered encouragement, and helped guide the birth as safely as possible. One of the best-known Roman medical writers, Cyrenus of Ephesus, even wrote detailed instructions for midwives. He advised that they should be patient, knowledgeable, gentle, and capable of comforting frightened mothers. That advice has aged remarkably well. Roman homes prepared carefully for childbirth. The room was kept warm. Fresh water was brought in. Clean blankets were laid out. Family members often waited anxiously nearby, listening for the first cry of the baby. Some probably paced the floor. Others quietly prayed. A nervous father likely asked the midwife every 5 minutes if everything was going well. She probably smiled politely, at least the first few times. Pregnancy itself brought both excitement and uncertainty. Without modern scans or medical testing, every month carried questions. Would the baby be healthy? Would the mother remain safe? Would everything go as hoped? These worries connected Roman parents with countless generations before and after them. Hope sounds very similar in every century. Roman medicine combined practical observation with beliefs that today seem rather unusual. Doctors recommended balanced diets, moderate exercise, and sufficient rest during pregnancy. Alongside these sensible ideas came charms, protective amulets, prayers, and rituals believed to guard both mother and child. Science and superstition often shared the same room. No one saw them as strangers. Many women wore small protective charms around their necks. Household shrines received offerings asking the gods for safe deliveries. Families especially honored goddesses connected with childbirth and motherhood, believing divine protection could make all the difference. Whether those prayers changed events or simply brought comfort, Comfort itself has always been valuable. Not every family hoped for a child immediately. Roman couples, like people today, sometimes wished to delay pregnancy for financial, personal, or health reasons. Ancient medical texts mention a surprising variety of contraceptive methods. Some involved herbal mixtures. Others recommended oils or ointments. Certain plants, such as pennyroyal, were believed to prevent pregnancy. Perhaps the most famous was a plant called silphium, once so highly valued that it appeared on coins from the North African city of Cyrene. Unfortunately for Roman families and modern botanists, it eventually disappeared, likely harvested into extinction. Its exact properties remain one of history's fascinating mysteries. Some ancient methods may have offered limited effectiveness. Many almost certainly did not. Without scientific testing, people relied upon experience, tradition, and hope. Sometimes those three agreed. Often they did not. Women also turned to herbal medicine for many other concerns. Infusions of fennel, mint, chamomile, cumin, and other plants were used to ease discomfort, improve digestion, or support recovery after childbirth. Some remedies probably provided genuine relief. Others likely worked because people believed they would. The human mind has always been a powerful partner in healing. Sadly, not every pregnancy ended happily. Miscarriages were common. Infant mortality remained heartbreakingly high. Many families experienced losses that modern medicine now prevents. Ancient tombstones preserve quiet expressions of grief for babies who lived only days or weeks. Parents mourned deeply. They loved deeply too. The emotional bond between Roman parents and their children was every bit as real as our own. After a successful birth, life changed quickly. The tiny baby was wrapped tightly in soft cloth, a practice called swaddling. Family members admired the newborn. Neighbors offered congratulations. The exhausted mother finally rested while the household adjusted to its newest and loudest resident. Some things never change. A newborn has an extraordinary talent for reorganizing everyone's schedule. The days following childbirth were devoted to recovery. Female relatives often remained close to help with cooking, cleaning, and caring for the infant. Midwives continued visiting when necessary, watching for signs of illness or complications. Their work did not end the moment the baby arrived. It had only entered a new chapter. Roman fathers also played an important role. Traditionally, a newborn was formally welcomed into the family through household ceremonies. This moment symbolized acceptance into the household and the beginning of a new life within the Roman community. For parents, it must have been filled with relief. The long months of waiting were finally over. The little child sleeping beside the lamp was no longer only a dream. Yet not every woman became a mother. Some never married. Some remained widows. Others lost children despite every hope and prayer. Ancient Rome, like every society, contained many different paths through life. Each carried its own joys. Each carried its own sorrows. As we quietly leave this peaceful household, the city outside remains wrapped in darkness. Most windows are now dark. Only a few lamps still glow against the night. Tomorrow, families will wake, children will laugh, merchants will open their shops, and life will continue as it always has. But beneath these ordinary routines stood a complex web of expectations. Marriage, honor, faithfulness, reputation. Roman society cared deeply about how people behaved, especially when love, desire, and family were involved. And those expectations were not merely social. They were written into the law itself. In our next chapter, we'll explore how Roman laws, morality, and public reputation shaped private relationships, revealing how the empire tried to regulate one of the few things that has never been easy to control: the human heart. As another Roman night quietly unfolds, imagine yourself standing beneath the gentle glow of an oil lamp outside the Forum. The streets are calm now. A few late travelers make their way home. Somewhere in the distance, a tavern door finally closes. The air feels cooler than it did only a few hours ago, carrying the scent of stone, olive trees, and the faint smoke of dying fires. Rome seems peaceful, yet beneath this peaceful surface lies something invisible. Rules. Not the kind painted on signs or posted online. The kind woven into society itself. Who you could marry, who you could love, how you were expected to behave, and what happened if you didn't. The Romans believed that a strong family created a strong state. Marriage was not simply a private matter between two people. It was considered part of the health of the entire republic and later the empire. If families remained stable, Rome remained stable. At least, that was the theory. Reality, as usual, proved rather more complicated. By the 1st century BC, many Roman writers complained that traditional family values were disappearing. Older generations insisted that young people no longer respected old customs. Luxury was increasing. Divorces were becoming more common. People seemed far too interested in pleasure. If that sounds familiar, every generation appears convinced the next one is somehow ruining civilization. The complaints are almost timeless. One of the most famous attempts to strengthen Roman family life came during the reign of Augustus. After years of civil war, Augustus wanted not only political peace but also moral stability. He introduced a series of marriage laws encouraging citizens, especially the upper classes, to marry and have children. Families with several children received certain legal advantages. Remaining unmarried for too long could carry penalties. The emperor, it seemed, had developed a surprising interest in everyone's dating life. Whether people appreciated that interest is another question entirely. Perhaps the most famous of these reforms concerned adultery. For the first time in Roman history, adultery became a public criminal offense rather than simply a private family matter. A married woman found guilty of adultery could face serious legal consequences. Property might be confiscated. Exile was possible. Her reputation could be permanently damaged. For Roman society, reputation mattered almost as much as wealth. Sometimes even more. A respectable name opened doors. A damaged one could quietly close them. The law, however, did not treat everyone equally. Roman society expected different standards from men and women. A married woman was expected to remain sexually faithful to her husband. A husband's situation was more complicated. Roman law generally judged him less by whether he had relationships outside marriage and more by with whom those relationships occurred. Relations with another respectable married woman could bring serious consequences. Relations with enslaved women or registered prostitutes were often viewed quite differently by society. To modernize, this double standard feels deeply unfair. Many Romans themselves likely recognized its contradictions, even if they rarely challenged them openly. Power has a habit of writing rules that favor itself. Divorce, surprisingly, was relatively straightforward. Unlike in many ancient societies, Roman couples could legally separate without years of complicated legal proceedings. Sometimes the husband initiated the divorce. Sometimes the wife did. Property agreements had to be settled. Families adjusted to new realities, and life continued. Divorce was not necessarily viewed as shocking. Several Romans married more than once over the course of their lives. Death, illness, politics, and changing circumstances often made second marriages practical. Even so, ending a marriage rarely happened without sadness. No legal document can completely erase shared memories. Roman households also cared deeply about honor. A family's reputation belonged not only to individuals but to the entire household. Parents worried about their children's behavior. Children reflected upon their parents. One scandal could become neighborhood gossip before breakfast the following morning. Ancient Rome possessed no social media. It hardly needed one. Neighbors were wonderfully efficient. Poets frequently explored these complicated emotions. Juvenal mocked hypocrisy among the wealthy. Martial filled his short poems with clever observations about jealousy, romance, vanity, and human weakness. Their humor reminds us that Romans laughed at themselves just as readily as we do. Sometimes perhaps a little too readily. Law was only one source of moral guidance. Religion also shaped everyday life. Families honored household gods. Festivals celebrated divine protection over marriage and fertility. Promises made during weddings carried religious as well as social meaning. Breaking those promises could feel like disappointing both family and the gods. Whether every Roman behaved accordingly, ancient gossip suggests otherwise. Social class added another layer of complexity. Elite families guarded their status carefully. Marriage between wealthy households often strengthened political alliances or protected family fortunes. Love might certainly develop, but practical considerations usually arrived first. For poorer Romans, survival often mattered more than social strategy. Finding steady work and enough food for children could outweigh questions of prestige. Yet, regardless of wealth, nearly everyone understood the value of trust. Trust between husband and wife, parents and children, friends and neighbors. Without trust, even the richest household could become an unhappy one. Ancient letters reveal couples missing one another during long journeys. Parents worrying about children studying far from home. Friends promising loyalty through difficult times. These small fragments survive because someone cared enough to write them down. Perhaps that is one of history's greatest gifts. It reminds us that ordinary emotions rarely disappear. As the night deepens, imagine a married couple sitting quietly beneath the last burning oil lamp. The children are asleep. The house has grown still. Outside, Rome continues its endless rhythm. Inside, two people speak softly about tomorrow. They discuss expenses, a cousin's upcoming wedding, the harvest, perhaps a neighbor who has somehow managed to create yet another scandal. Every neighborhood seems to have one. Then they extinguish the lamp. The room falls into darkness. The laws of Rome remain outside. The opinions of neighbors remain outside. For a few peaceful hours, only family remains. Yet even Roman law recognized that love and marriage were never entirely separate from religion. The gods, after all, watched over every part of life. And among them stood one goddess more closely connected with beauty, desire, fertility, and romance than any other. As dawn remains hours away, temples and household shrines still hold tiny flickering flames in her honor. In our next chapter, we'll visit the festivals, rituals, and celebrations dedicated to Venus, discovering how romance, faith, music, and community came together beneath the star-filled skies of ancient Rome. The night has reached its calmest hour. Most of Rome is asleep. The taverns have grown quiet. The last travelers have found a place to rest. Only a few lamps still glow behind wooden shutters, and the gentle splash of public fountains echoes through the empty streets. Yet not every light has gone out. Some still burn for the gods. If there was one Roman deity most closely connected with love, beauty, desire, and new beginnings, it was Venus. To us today, Venus is often remembered simply as the goddess of romance. To the Romans, she was much more. She represented beauty, fertility, prosperity, good fortune, the continuation of families, even the future of Rome itself. According to Roman tradition, the legendary hero Aeneas was the son of Venus, making the goddess a divine ancestor of the Roman people. That gave her a very special place in the Roman imagination. She was not merely admired, she was family. Throughout the city stood temples where people offered prayers, flowers, incense, wine, and small gifts in hopes of receiving the goddess's favor. Some visitors prayed for a happy marriage. Others hoped to meet a future husband or wife. Young couples quietly asked for lasting affection. Married women prayed for healthy pregnancies. Merchants even requested good fortune in business. Apparently, if you were already visiting the goddess, you might as well ask for everything. Religion in ancient Rome was wonderfully practical. Inside ordinary homes, faith felt much more personal. Nearly every household contained a small shrine called a lararium, usually placed in a quiet corner of the home. Small painted figures of the household gods stood there, surrounded by tiny offerings left by family members. A little bread, fresh fruit, olive oil, a handful of flowers. Nothing extravagant. The value lay in the thought rather than the expense. As evening came to an end, many families paused for a brief prayer together. The father might lead. The mother might prepare the offering. Children watched carefully, slowly learning traditions that had already been passed from one generation to the next for centuries. The ceremony lasted only a few moments, but those moments helped turn an ordinary house into a home. Certain times of the year brought even greater celebrations. Roman festivals filled the calendar, blending religion with music, food, theater, games, and public gatherings. The streets became brighter, markets grew busier, neighbors visited one another. Musicians wandered through crowds while children eagerly searched for sweets and entertainment. The city itself seemed to smile. One festival especially associated with Venus was the Veneralia, celebrated each spring. Women visited temples dedicated to the goddess, washing her sacred statue with fresh water before decorating it with flowers and fragrant garlands. Prayers followed. Some sought successful marriages. Others asked for harmony within existing relationships. Many simply hoped for happiness in the months ahead. Hope, after all, requires no translation. Music played an important role during festivals. The gentle sound of flutes drifted through temple courtyards. Lyres accompanied singers performing traditional hymns. Drums added lively rhythms during processions. The music wasn't meant to overwhelm. It created an atmosphere where celebration and devotion comfortably shared the same space. Imagine walking through Rome beneath hundreds of glowing oil lamps. Garlands hang above the streets. Fresh flowers decorate doorways. Neighbors greet one another warmly. Someone offers you a small piece of honey cake. Children laugh nearby. A musician begins playing a familiar melody. For a little while, everyday worries seem surprisingly far away. Festivals also gave young people opportunities to meet. Respectable courtship often happened under the watchful eyes of families and neighbors, but public celebrations naturally brought many people together. A conversation beside a temple, a shared smile during a procession. a brief meeting while watching musicians perform. History has always been full of romances that began with remarkably ordinary moments. One glance, one greeting, one excuse to continue talking just a little longer. Even married couples often rediscovered one another during these celebrations. Away from daily responsibilities, husbands and wives could enjoy music, good food, and peaceful walks through decorated streets. Children chased friends through crowded squares while parents smiled at their endless energy. Grandparents watched with quiet satisfaction. Life continued, generation after generation. Religion also shaped ideas about fertility. Roman families hoped for healthy children, successful harvests, and peaceful homes. The blessings of the gods seemed woven into every part of daily life. Offerings sought protection not because Romans believed life would become perfect, but because they understood how uncertain life could be. War, disease, poor harvests, unexpected loss. No family escaped worry forever. Faith offered comfort when certainty could not. Of course, Roman religion contained its own contradictions. The same society that praised faithful marriage also celebrated gods whose myths included dramatic romances, jealous rivalries, impossible love affairs, and enough family arguments to make any modern gathering seem wonderfully peaceful. Even the gods occasionally needed relationship advice. Fortunately for Olympus, no one had invented family counseling. Ancient poets delighted in these stories. They reminded listeners that love was rarely simple. It inspired courage, created beauty, caused heartbreak, sometimes all within the same afternoon. Perhaps that is why Venus remained so beloved. She represented not only happiness but the complicated nature of human affection itself. No law could command love. No emperor could completely control it. No philosopher could fully explain it. The goddess quietly smiled while humanity continued trying anyway. As the festival slowly came to an end, lamps burned lower throughout the city. Families returned home carrying flowers from the temple. Musicians packed away their instruments. The streets gradually emptied. Only scattered petals remained where crowds had gathered only hours before. The city settled once more into peaceful silence. But there is one place where the sounds of Roman evenings never truly faded. One city where taverns, temples, bedrooms, shops, graffiti, and even brothels remained almost exactly as they were on an ordinary night nearly 2,000 years ago. Its people never expected to become part of history, yet history preserved them anyway. In our next chapter, we'll return to the ash-covered streets of Pompeii, where archaeology has frozen an entire Roman night in time, allowing us to walk beside ordinary people whose final evening still whispers to us across the centuries. The sky is still dark. The stars still shine above southern Italy. A gentle breeze drifts through narrow streets paved with smooth volcanic stone. For one ordinary evening in the summer of AD 79, nothing seemed unusual. Families finished their dinners. Children slowly became sleepy. Taverns served another round of wine. Merchants counted their coins before locking their doors. A traveler searched for a place to spend the night. Someone laughed at a joke. Someone kissed their husband goodbye before bed. Someone probably promised to wake up early tomorrow. Tomorrow, however, would never come. When eruption of Mount Vesuvius buried Pompeii beneath volcanic ash, an entire Roman town was preserved with extraordinary detail. For historians, it became something almost impossible. A time capsule, not of kings, not of famous generals, but of ordinary life. Walking through Pompeii today feels strangely intimate. The streets remain exactly where Roman feet once walked. Will ruts carved by carts still cross the stone roads? Stepping stones stand above what were once muddy streets, allowing pedestrians to cross without soaking their sandals after rain. Even now, they quietly wait for people who will never return. The city itself was busy long after sunset. Archaeologists discovered dozens of taverns scattered throughout Pompeii. Many still contain large clay jars built directly into stone counters. These jars once held wine, olives, beans, stew, and other ready-to-eat meals for customers who preferred buying dinner rather than cooking at home. Imagine stopping there after a long day's work. The owner recognizes your face. He already knows your favorite wine. You exchange a few friendly words before carrying dinner back through the evening streets. Small routines create a feeling of home. One of Pompeii's greatest gifts is its graffiti. Thousands of messages remain scratched across walls all over the city. Some advertise political candidates. Others announce gladiator games. Many simply record ordinary thoughts. A name, a greeting, a joke, a complaint about someone who apparently deserved complaining about. And then there are messages about love. Some are surprisingly sweet. One admirer praises the beauty of a woman whose name has survived for 2,000 years. Another writer proudly announces romantic success. Someone else leaves behind a heartbreak that still feels familiar today. People have always hoped their feelings might outlive them. Sometimes they actually do. Bedrooms throughout Pompeii also reveal a quieter side of Roman life. Many houses contain modest sleeping rooms with little more than beds, lamps, storage chests, and painted walls. The paintings often depict peaceful gardens, birds, flowers, or scenes from mythology. Imagine falling asleep beneath images of blooming trees while an oil lamp slowly burns beside your bed. Feels unexpectedly comforting. Even wealthy homes remind us that people valued beauty in everyday life. A painted wall could transform an ordinary room into something dreamlike, not because anyone expected perfection, but because beauty makes ordinary days feel a little brighter. The brothels, too, remain remarkably well preserved. We've already visited the famous Lupanar, but it was not the city's only place offering paid companionship. Smaller establishments appeared throughout Pompeii, often connected to taverns or inns where travelers spent the night. This reminds us that prostitution formed part of ordinary urban life rather than existing entirely apart from it. Archaeologists continue studying these buildings carefully, separating evidence from exaggeration. The stones themselves usually speak more honestly than popular myths. Everyday objects tell equally fascinating stories. A wooden cradle, cooking pots left exactly where someone last used them, glass perfume bottles, hairpins, jewelry, dice waiting for another game, keys still hanging from doors, loaves of bread, carbonized by volcanic heat, remain preserved inside ancient ovens. It is impossible not to imagine the baker planning tomorrow's customers. History paused his work forever. Perhaps the most moving discoveries are the plaster casts. When archaeologists excavated empty spaces left in hardened ash, they realized these cavities had once surrounded human bodies. By carefully filling them with plaster, they revealed the final positions of Pompeii's residents. A mother protecting her child, friends embracing, people covering their faces against falling ash. These are not statues. They are moments, frozen forever. They remind us that every artifact once belonged to a living person with hopes, fears, friendships, responsibilities, and dreams of tomorrow. Pompeii also reveals something historians deeply appreciate. Ordinary life is often more interesting than extraordinary events. Here we find laundry shops, bakeries, public baths, garden fountains, children's toys, kitchen utensils, bedroom decorations. None of these objects were meant to become famous. They survived simply because disaster arrived too quickly for anyone to carry them away. Ironically, the eruption preserved exactly the kind of history that usually disappears first. The everyday. As you quietly walk through Pompeii's silent streets, it becomes easier to picture the final peaceful evening before everything changed. A wife folding fresh linen. A husband finishing one last cup of watered wine. A musician returning home after entertaining guests. A tavern owner extinguishing his lamps. A child asking whether tomorrow would bring another trip to the market. None of them knew history was already standing at their doorstep. That thought carries a quiet sadness, but also a gentle reminder. Most people never know which ordinary evening will become their last ordinary evening. Perhaps that is why ordinary moments deserve our attention. The shared dinner, the conversation before sleep, the smile exchanged across a room. These are the moments archaeology cannot always preserve. Yet somehow, Pompeii helps us imagine them anyway. The city does not merely teach us about ancient Rome. It teaches us about being human. As the night slowly comes to an end, one final question remains. For centuries, books, films, and television have painted ancient Rome as a place of endless luxury, constant excess, and outrageous behavior. But how much of that picture is actually true? And how much belongs more to Hollywood than to history? In our next chapter, we'll gently separate myth from reality, discovering where the evidence ends, where imagination begins, and why the real story of Roman nights is far more fascinating than the legends. Our night in ancient Rome is almost over. The oil lamps are burning low. The streets have grown peaceful again. Behind wooden doors, families are sleeping. Somewhere, a watchman slowly walks his route through the quiet city. A fountain continues its gentle song, just as it did yesterday, and the day before that, and perhaps for generations before. Before the first light of dawn appears, there is one last thing we should do. Separate the stories from the evidence. Ancient Rome has inspired countless novels, films, television series, and documentaries. Some are wonderfully researched. Others are wonderfully imaginative. And sometimes those two qualities are not quite the same thing. Over the years, a picture has developed of Roman nightlife that feels almost unbelievable. Every wealthy citizen supposedly attended enormous parties every evening. Every street was filled with wild celebrations. Every marriage was unhappy. Every emperor was completely outrageous. Every Roman spent their nights surrounded by endless luxury and constant romance. It certainly makes exciting entertainment. History, however, is usually quieter and far more interesting. Let's begin with perhaps the biggest myth of all, that ancient Rome was one endless party. The archaeological evidence simply doesn't support that picture. Most Romans were ordinary working people. They woke early, worked long hours, returned home tired, shared dinner with family, spent time with neighbors, then went to sleep because another day of work waited in the morning. That rhythm sounds surprisingly familiar. Yes, banquets happened. Yes, festivals filled the streets with music. Yes, taverns remained lively long after sunset. But these moments stood alongside thousands of ordinary evenings spent at home. History often remembers celebrations, quietly forgets routine. Another popular myth suggests that Roman marriage lacked affection. The evidence tells a much gentler story. Tomb inscriptions written by grieving husbands and wives speak with remarkable tenderness. Ancient letters reveal couples missing one another during long separations. Parents proudly celebrated children. Families mourned together. Love certainly existed. It simply looked different depending upon the people involved. Arranged marriages were common, but arranged did not necessarily mean cold. Shared years often created deep emotional bonds. Some marriages failed. Many endured, just like today. Then there is the belief that every Roman woman spent her days hidden indoors with no influence over family life. Again, reality proves more complicated. Roman women could own property, manage businesses, supervise large households, oversee finances, and sometimes exercise considerable influence within their communities. Their legal rights remained limited compared with men's, but they were far from invisible. Stone inscriptions, business records, and archaeological discoveries continue revealing women whose lives were far richer and more active than older stereotypes suggested. Another familiar image is the famous Roman feast where guests supposedly ate until they could eat no more before deliberately making themselves sick to continue the meal. This story refuses to disappear, yet historians generally agree it greatly exaggerates reality. Romans certainly enjoyed luxurious banquets. Some wealthy individuals lived extravagantly. But the famous idea that everyone regularly visited special rooms for vomiting during dinner belongs much more to modern misunderstanding than everyday Roman practice. History occasionally becomes trapped by memorable myths, even when the evidence quietly disagrees. What about prostitution? Popular culture often presents ancient Rome as completely accepting of it. The truth is far more balanced. Prostitution was legal. It was visible. It formed part of urban life. Yet prostitutes usually occupied a low social position and often faced lasting stigma. Many worked because poverty, slavery, or limited opportunities left few alternatives. Acceptance did not equal respect. Roman society managed to depend upon prostitution while simultaneously judging many who worked within it. Human societies have always been wonderfully complicated. Movies also love portraying every Roman home as an enormous marble palace. Archaeology politely disagrees. Most Romans lived modestly. Many occupied crowded apartments. Furniture was simple. Rooms were small. Only a tiny percentage enjoyed the luxurious villas that so often appear on television. The average Roman family would probably have been amazed to discover how glamorous modern films believe they were. Even emperors have not escaped exaggeration. Names like Nero or Caligula often dominate popular imagination. Their dramatic stories attract attention. Yet focusing only on extraordinary rulers creates a distorted picture of Roman life. Most Romans never met an emperor. Many probably thought more about tomorrow's bread than tomorrow's politics. For them, life revolved around family, neighbors, work, religion, and community, not palace intrigue. Perhaps the greatest lesson archaeology teaches is humility. Every new excavation adds another small piece to the puzzle. Sometimes discoveries confirm old ideas. Sometimes they completely change them. Historians regularly debate evidence because genuine scholarship welcomes better answers, not certainty for its own sake. That is why places like Pompeii remain so valuable. The city preserved ordinary moments rather than carefully edited history. A loaf of bread forgotten in an oven. A child's toy lying beside a bed. Graffiti scratched onto a tavern wall. a perfume bottle left upon a shelf. These humble objects often reveal more about Roman life than the speeches of famous politicians. They belong to people whose names history almost forgot. Yet together they tell perhaps the most honest story of all. The Romans laughed, worked, fell in love, argued with neighbors, raised children, complained about noisy streets, worried about money, dreamed about tomorrow, just as we do. Their clothes looked different. Their laws were different. Their beliefs sometimes feel unfamiliar. But beneath those differences remained something instantly recognizable: human nature. The more we study ancient Rome, the less its people resemble distant strangers. Instead, they become neighbors living 2,000 years away. That realization may be history's greatest gift. It quietly reminds us that time changes buildings, languages, governments, and technology far more quickly than it changes the human heart. And now, as the final hours of darkness slowly fade, our journey through one Roman night is nearly complete. The taverns have emptied. The musicians have gone home. The last oil lamps flicker behind closing shutters. Soon, the first birds will begin to sing, and another ordinary day will rise over the eternal city. In our final chapter, we'll watch Rome gently fall asleep, reflecting on everything we've discovered and the quiet truth that connects their world with our own across 20 centuries. The night is almost over. Above the rooftops of Rome, the stars still shine with quiet confidence, but along the eastern horizon, the faintest hint of dawn is beginning to soften the darkness. It is the hour when even the busiest city finally grows still. The taverns that echoed with laughter only a short while ago have emptied. The last cups of watered wine have been washed and stacked away. Wooden stools are turned upside down onto tables. A tired tavern keeper yawns, stretches his aching back, and blows out one final oil lamp before locking the door. Tomorrow evening, the same familiar faces will return. The same stories will probably be told again, and somehow, everyone will enjoy hearing them. The musicians have packed away their lyres and flutes. Their melodies no longer drift through the streets. Instead, only the gentle splash of public fountains fills the silence. Water flows endlessly through the aqueducts, just as it has every hour of the night. Quiet, patient, steady. In the wealthy neighborhoods, elegant villas rest peacefully. Banquet halls that sparkled with conversation only hours before now sit empty. Half-finished cups of wine remain beside silver plates. A forgotten flower lies upon a polished marble floor. Servants quietly clear the final dishes before slipping away to find a few precious hours of sleep themselves. Even luxury eventually becomes tired. Across the city, in modest homes, parents pull blankets a little higher over sleeping children. An elderly grandmother snores softly in the next room. A baby stirs for a moment before settling again into peaceful dreams. A husband and wife sleep side by side after another ordinary day filled with work, conversation, small disagreements, shared laughter, and quiet affection. No historian recorded their names. Yet together they built the Rome that emperors ruled. Not the other way around. In the crowded apartment buildings, the city never becomes completely silent. Someone coughs through the thin walls. A restless neighbor turns over in bed. A wooden floor creaks beneath careful footsteps. A cat wanders across a rooftop searching for one last adventure before sunrise. Even while sleeping, Rome continues breathing. Slowly, gently, life goes on. Elsewhere, a few people remain awake. Night watchmen continue their rounds carrying small lamps through narrow streets. Their footsteps echo softly across worn paving stones polished by countless generations. They pause occasionally, listening for trouble. Most nights, they find only peaceful silence. Doctors remain ready in case someone suddenly falls ill. Midwives sleep lightly, knowing that babies rarely choose convenient hours to arrive. Bakers begin preparing dough long before dawn, filling the cool morning air with the comforting smell of fresh bread. For them, tomorrow has already begun. The women who spent the evening working in brothels quietly close their doors. Some count the few coins they earned. Others remove carefully arranged jewelry before washing away perfume that has lingered since sunset. Many are simply exhausted. Behind every ancient profession stood an ordinary human being hoping for enough money to face another day. The wealthy courtesans have also returned home. The elegant conversations are finished. The poetry has been recited. The music has faded into memory. Silk garments are carefully folded away. Hairpins are removed one by one until elaborate hairstyles slowly fall into loose curls. For a few peaceful hours, even the most admired woman in Rome becomes simply another tired person ready for sleep. Perhaps that is one of history's quietest truths. When the lamps go out, status matters a little less. Everyone dreams beneath the same sky. As dawn approaches, the temples stand peacefully in the growing light. The household shrines inside Roman homes still hold tiny traces of yesterday's offerings. A few flowers remain fresh. Others have already begun to fade. Tomorrow, new prayers will replace old ones. New hopes will quietly take the place of yesterday's worries. Such is the gentle rhythm of life. As we look back over this long Roman night, we realize something surprising. We did not spend our evening only with emperors or generals. We met bakers, merchants, mothers, midwives, musicians, servants, travelers, courtesans, tavern keepers, children chasing one another through quiet streets, couples sharing simple dinners, neighbors exchanging friendly gossip, ordinary people. History books often focus on extraordinary lives, but civilizations are not built by extraordinary people alone. They are built by millions of ordinary mornings, ordinary evenings, ordinary acts of kindness, and ordinary dreams. Rome could certainly be cruel. Slavery existed. Disease spread without warning. Women and men lived under laws that often treated them unequally. Many people struggled simply to survive. It would be unfair to imagine ancient Rome as some perfect golden age. It wasn't. Yet within that imperfect world, people still found beauty. A child laughing beside a fountain, fresh bread shared with family, a favorite song played softly after sunset. The comforting warmth of another person's hand, the quiet relief of arriving safely home. Those moments mattered then. They still matter now. Perhaps that is why the ruins of Rome continue to speak to us. Not because marble temples are impressive, although they certainly are. Not because emperors conquered vast territories, although they undoubtedly did. But because beneath all the grandeur lived people whose hopes looked remarkably familiar. They searched for friendship, for love, for security, for purpose, for someone who would remember them. In a way, they succeeded. 2,000 years later, we are still walking beside them. We still smile at their jokes scratched onto stone walls. We still admire the jewelry they once wore. We still read the poems they wrote for those they loved. We still stand inside homes where families once gathered around tiny oil lamps. The centuries between us begin to feel surprisingly small. And now the first birds begin singing. A pale golden light slowly reaches the rooftops of the Eternal City. Shopkeepers will soon lift their wooden shutters. The smell of fresh bread will drift through the streets once again. Children will wake. Merchants will return to the markets. Life will begin another ordinary day. Our long Roman night has finally come to an end. Thank you for wandering these quiet streets together, for looking beyond the famous monuments, and for meeting the ordinary people who filled them with life. As you leave ancient Rome behind, perhaps carry one small thought with you. Empires rise, empires fall, buildings crumble, statues break, names are forgotten, but kindness, companionship, laughter shared over a simple meal, the comfort of coming home after a long day, and the quiet hope that tomorrow will be a little brighter than today. Those things have changed very little. They belong to the Romans. They belong to us. And beneath the same stars that watched over the Eternal City 2,000 years ago, they always will.